In this video, you will see how to create cool multi-layered basses. It is not the first time that I'm showing a technique like this. There was a video that I made before about how you can create drops without lead melodies, and this one is really similar. It has a little bit of a lead melody, but it's not really like an independent one. It still pretty much replicates the pattern of the synths and the mid basses and the sub basses, but this one has a way better outcome. So I'm going to go through the layers individually and tell you exactly what I've been doing right here to reach such powerful sound. A lot of the times, richness of the sound comes from complexity, and in this particular demo, I think I was playing around with random distortions. So this is the first layer that we're going to talk about. It's called melodic mid. It's a really powerful layer, but if you actually listen to how it sounds without all the sound effects, it's nothing special. It's just a couple of wavetables with some fine tuning, so they're kind of creating this wobbly distortion in between themselves. There's like an LFO. Yeah, there's just a few LFOs. This one is an LFO that I set for the pitch shifting, so it's coarse pitch. A very basic one. This one is for low pass. There's a little bit of distortion and a little bit of EQing. So this is like, it cannot get any more simple than that. And obviously you can see that this is -2 octaves. So this is a lower layer. And this is like a higher layer. So this is how it sounds. And then I opened a Pro Q3 and I knew like beforehand that if I'm going to add a lot of different distortions, a lot of stereo information is going to pop up, and I don't want that, especially because sometimes I use a reverb in my chain. I know that's crazy, but I do that all the time. So yeah, I introduced this plugin called Destructor, which was, I never used it before, and I decided to add some grit to the sound and let me remove all the effects, just leave the equalizer and the destructor here. So it's like a guitar pedal. You see, it sounds, it has the presets from Harmor, which is a really cool FL Studio plugin. And I chose a blood overdrive mode, and I used a pretty dark color, so it doesn't have a lot of high information. And the reason why I do that is because I want to add the high end artificially through distortion. Sometimes I do that because it creates complexity of the sound, which you otherwise would not achieve. And I know it's just something that I do a lot. It's like a habit. So I used equalizer to remove low mids. You don't need a lot of low mids. That's really, it creates a really nasty sound, which you don't want. Some high mids, I boosted a little bit of that. Then one more equalizer to create a notch filter. I used to like to kind of, you know, like automate stuff like this. But in this particular demo, I decided to just keep it stationary and add a lot of distortion. So here's a cool trick, you guys. If you make a notch filter like this with 2 notch points, when you add a distortion on top of it, it makes a really cool sound. So it's really deep and powerful. Then I decided to add one more distortion because I'm crazy like that. And then I added one more parametric equalizer to remove the low end, which happens to appear from adding all these distortions. And you can see that here in the mixer, I also have a small high pass. Then I used a Pro R. Let me turn off the Tora Verb because it obviously annoys you. So at this point, I decided to make a really short reverb. So let me explain what I'm doing here. So you can hear the sound goes more stereo. And this is why I decided to use that first equalizer that I talked about, where I have this blue line, which is stereo. So this means that stereo goes mute, it goes to mono, starting from like 120 Hertz. It's getting a little bit more stereo. Then in the mid, it goes a little bit more mono. That's because with all these reverbs and all the processing, a lot of dirt is happening. We don't need that. We need to make sure the sound is narrow enough in the low end and opens up a little bit in the higher spectrum. So this is how I do this. You see it has more room, but the room is really short. It's like 1/10 of a second. Then I use a limiter to boost the volume, kickstart for sidechaining, and an extra layer. This is like the mixer track where all my processing for all my basses is located. So I'm using a frequency shifter here. I'm going to show you that one later. A sausage fattener. And you can hear now that the high end and the mid-high is absolutely different from what it used to be in the beginning when we just played the serum. And that is because you created a lot of distortion, a lot of complex noises, a lot of complex mathematics is going on in the background, and it sounds dirty and heavy and pedally, and this is what I was looking for in this layer. So I added a little bit of Tora Verb, which is a really cool reverb, and it has a built-in sidechain, so you can hear the reverb appear only when the sound is not playing anymore. This is the reason why I love this plugin. So next thing that I made was a sub bass. Everybody must know how I make my sub basses. It's a really basic sine wave and a little bit of soft clipping. Literally, that's it. And what I like to do is to make it really loud in the mix. But sometimes when you make your sub bass too loud, you start to feel the dirt in your mix and the mixing sucks. And this is why I told you guys that in my first layer, I was cutting out a lot of low information. You can see here, here, everywhere, because you need to make sure that there is enough space for your sub bass. So it sounds kind of powerful. And one more synth that I made right here was a square synth. And I think it's easier to show you how you can make this one. It's actually really basic, but you need to learn how to use a bandpass, because if you don't, chances are something's gonna sound a little bit off. You're gonna be like, hey, I watched the tutorial and it didn't work. So square wavetable is the one that I like to use for basses like this. I go -2 octaves, then I create a filter and I open bandpass. So here you need to add a lot of drive and a lot of resonance, like this, and then you add distortion. There you go. And, you know, an option, if you want your sound to be more powerful, use it with multiband compressor. You can add like a hyper dimension to make it fat. Make sure not to make it too fat. You have a lot of layers, a lot of stuff going on. If it's too fat, it's going to consume space in your mix. But this is how you make a bass like that. So it's a very simple layer and it works every time. Back in the day, people used to use this layer for their main bass, but with time I noticed that this became a little bit too generic. So instead you can use a bass like this as a layer. And it's gonna sound so great with your sub bass. And it's gonna sound so great with your mid bass. That's amazing. So next thing that I made in this track was open Dune 3 and go through a couple of presets. I have a lot of presets and I found this little preset here, which is a very simple lead. I added a couple of saturators, really gentle ones, to make the sound more compressed. You can use a compressor instead, it doesn't matter. Then I removed a lot of low end, and you can see that I'm deliberately removing so much mid information right here. Otherwise it would sound like this. So too much stuff going on there. And usually you don't want that in your electronic music. You want to make sure that bass sounds are the dominant sounds. They are the ones where you extract all your power from. So this lead is only there as a little like extra coat of paint. It's not going to be very important. basically there for noise and for little explanation, like what is going on here, what is the melody, what is the track about. So it's kind of like that. And the last layer that I used here was Massive, which is a really simple saw. And I decided to add it on the simple mixer track as our first sound, this one. So that's why they sound so similar. And now let's talk about balancing those things out. So, I mean, I'm using sausage fattener here and a limiter, so I limit the loudness of all my basses and including the lead synth to -3.3. This is subject to change, so for now I found that this was loud enough, but this might change as I keep working on this demo. So a lot of the time I notice that my sub bass is missing something like it does in this particular demo here. So the reason why it's happening is because I have this frequency shifter effect right here. You can see it. So what it does is it changes the tone of the frequency. It's a really weird like ring mod kind of a thing, and it doesn't really work so well with sub basses. So you can hear it going down and the sub bass is getting completely consumed. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna find this sub layer, and oh yeah, you can see the mistake is that I accidentally put my sub bass to a different mixer track. So I'm gonna put it back to 5, and you can see that other basses like mid melodic layer, the mid layer, they're all connected to these all bass and lead sounds, and so the lead layer is here as well. But the sub layer, I actually, you see, it's separate. You can hear how the tape stop effect does not affect the sub bass. Okay, once again, let's play them. So actually I turned everything off, so let me show you normally. It's not affected at all. And that is because, you know, all those tape stop effects, they're not really good for bass most of the time. So I go, but the bass is stationary. Just all the other layers are being ducked. So I created a really simple automation, and this is what makes the idea a little bit more fresh, because the sounds themselves, yeah, they're kind of complex, but kind of not super creative, but it still sounds pretty nice. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about the drums here. So the snare is from my upcoming sample pack, which is going to be released shortly after this video on arcsamples.com, and I'm gonna show you quickly how the drums sound here. Very basic, but very powerful. So it took a while to make the snare, and actually I think this is, yes, this video is, this snare is exactly the same method of creating snares as from my last snare production videos. So a very simple project here, and you can see that in the balance of the mix, sub bass is really powerful. So it's -4.6, which is really loud, and you can actually push it even louder. And let's talk about this lead here. You can see that the lead is actually quieter in the mix. Our sub bass is -4, and this one gives us what, like -7. So this is a perception issue. You can hear that this lead is super loud, but actually the sub bass is louder. I know, it's weird if you're a new guy, but that's how music works. So let's talk about this other like mid layers. Usually those mid layers, I don't make them as loud, so it has a little bit of that like spike, but normally I would make them, if I were to mix this demo properly, I would probably make it quieter. So the mid bass is even more quiet, and you've probably seen that in previous videos as well. I like to keep my mid basses a little bit quieter, not specifically for this track, but for most tracks. This is like a principle that I have, but I actually only follow this principle with this particular mid bass because it's a second mid bass, and because the layer is kind of annoying and you've heard it so many times. So it's barely noticeable. It's quieter than the lead sound. It's quieter than the sub sound. Is in somewhere like behind, just to create, you know, a little bit of something. Some harmonics are added. But then I contradict myself because I'm using this super, super loud mid bass layer, but I don't even know if this is supposed to be like that. I'm still considering if I should make it quieter because I really like when my sub bass is dominating, not my mid bass. It's a little too loud, perhaps. Most of the times, I follow the principle of making mid basses quieter than the sub bass. So this sounds a little bit more gathered together. I just made this layer like 40% quieter. Let me hear how this sounds in the context of the drop. Well, for whatever reason, I just feel like this dirty layer should be loud at the moment. But we'll see, we'll keep working on this track and see what happens. If you enjoy what you see, you can download the project from my Boosty. You can sub there for $5 a month. It's actually not expensive at all, and there's a lot of cool content there. And yep, I'll see you around.